There was a time when neighborhood holidays offered some the opportunity to tell an extraordinary story from the past year. Here's one of those stories. Amelia Sonnenstrahl is a beautiful, German-speaking Belgian psychic in her 40s with renowned expertise. She always had extremely clear visions of the past, present, and future, her clients say on social media. And she knew how to make all this information available to those who came to see her, from Belgium and surrounding countries, with great simplicity, honesty, and humility. Her compassion for people in difficulty was palpable. But her true passion resided in a deliberate practice of mediumship, in other words, a natural contact with the deceased. She had practiced it regularly since her adolescence. With great discernment, as her maternal grandmother, Mona Muller, had patiently taught her. She never presented these dialogues with the invisible as an unusual activity. So much so that Amelia herself still considers it just one skill to be developed among others. A bit like an athlete who aspires to reach the highest level in swimming, for example. When Amelia made it her profession, she didn't have to rely on advertising to make herself known. Because word of mouth worked wonderfully and easily filled her appointment book, including during her conferences. Over the years, interacting with the invisibles had gradually become second nature to her. There's nothing really paranormal about all this, she used to tell her visitors to put them at ease from the start. Amelia really refused only one thing: media requests in any form whatsoever, ever since the day a journalist in a regional daily newspaper took the liberty of portraying her as a sort of elected official, sick, with an exceptional gift. Because that was the complete opposite of what she wanted to be.
Her sessions took place at home, in a modest office, always very clean and soberly decorated. There was none of the noisy elements so customary to the Madame Irma in her medium's office. People from all walks of life therefore came there 3 days a week, with a maximum of 3 receptions per day. The ritual Amelia imposed on her clients was always the same: provide the first and last name or a photo of the deceased whose presence was desired, then fall silent. The clients, who sat opposite her, then watched the medium concentrate for a few moments with her eyes closed. If a smile appeared on her face during this concentration, it meant that the soul of the awaited deceased had just arrived in the room or manifested itself. A dialogue could then begin. Amelia would then start to present biographical details of the deceased, the purpose of which was to show that it was indeed the awaited person who had answered the call. Your father tells me he was employed in a coal mine, for example. In return, the consultants were only allowed to respond to these statements with yes, or no, or maybe, in order to keep this recognition test pure and valid. It happened, rarely, but it did happen, that it did not ultimately correspond to the person hoped for. The medium then released the deceased from her presence and invited the consultants to leave, asking them to kindly excuse the time she had made them waste by coming. But when the soul of the deceased had made itself recognized, a game of questions and answers followed, always fascinating, which the medium echoed as faithfully as possible to her visitors. The souls who answered Amelia's prayers were overwhelmingly anonymous beings: grandparents, aunts and uncles, mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters, stillborn children, and sometimes particularly pampered pets. But occasionally, the soul of a famous person on earth would respond to the invitation. This, oddly enough, always seemed to make the medium's task a little easier. Someone once ventured to ask Amelia if she had a guide in the afterlife to help her in her practice, as was the case for several of her colleagues. The medium knew how controversial this was, given the vast range of possibilities in this field and the great skepticism of those entrusted with this type of information. She therefore made a habit of answering in the affirmative and calling her guide the friend. A bit like Reynaud Roussel, a highly skilled French medium whose very informative lecture she had attended in Brussels. But she then just as consistently refused to elaborate on this confession. Not everyone is ready to hear everything, she repeated tirelessly. It was a safeguard her grandmother Mona had urged her to use without moderation, and she complied with it scrupulously every time. On the other hand, she had never hesitated to reveal the identity of this friend to this grandmother when she asked. Because this identity could change. One day, in fact, when everything was going wrong for Amelia, it was at her beginnings, Mona had discovered that an identity thief had passed himself off as the usual beginner's guide. And he had made her miss 3 successive performances while laughing about it. Mona had taken matters into her own hands immediately and put the crook to flight manu militari.
Ruf sofort den Erzengel Michael an, wenn es noch einmal passieren muss. Wird das Problem sofort für dich lösen.
Call on the Archangel Saint Michael right away if this happens again. He will solve the problem for you immediately. She added to her granddaughter. The intervention had clearly been forceful, since it had never happened again since.
That said, Amelia's helpers in the afterlife were, in most cases, either her uncle Georges, the late brother of the young medium's father, or angels, archangels, or ascended masters, and sometimes extraterrestrial beings who were particularly evolved and benevolent towards her. It was these helpers who one day turned Amelia's life upside down. And turned upside down is almost a pale understatement compared to what actually happened, as we shall see, even though it had been announced to her as a simple birthday present. Amelia still remembers that day as if it were yesterday. She was born on January 1st. And that year, it fell on a Saturday. She and her husband had spent almost the entire day before preparing dinner and the lovely New Year's Eve party they were about to host for a few family members. They wanted the reception to be pearlescent, a happy start to the new year for everyone. So they had bought gifts for everyone. It was a personalized perfume for the ladies and a vintage Bordeaux wine for the men. They had each one very carefully wrapped, labeled, and placed under the Christmas tree, which they had taken to keeping for its beauty until January 5th. The dinner itself had been conceived with the precision of a music composer for an unforgettable work. They had also planned to play soft music at appropriate moments. Amelia got dressed and applied very light makeup for the evening. As she had some time left before the first guests arrived, she had decided to take a few moments to meditate. She therefore withdrew to her office and humbly asked the friend to join her there to help her rise to the occasion. Uncle George had arrived almost immediately. He had expressed his sincere flattery at the trust she had placed in him with this request just a few minutes before the New Year's Eve dinner. But he immediately added that, on the looming anniversary, another visitor was about to arrive, which was there in a few moments. Georges introduced him as a being without a name. Then he corrected himself and clarified that for him, Georges, and for all the beings around him in the beyond, it was truly the supreme authority with whom they were dealing. For, he added, there is not and never has been any other entity hierarchically superior to him. In response to his words, the unexpected visitor, who appeared to be in his 30s and possessed undeniable physical beauty, turned to Amelia. He smiled at her and spoke with infinite gentleness.
We have, your Uncle George, all my advisors, and myself a birthday present for you, Amelia. Consider it a reward for all the effort you've put into making people happy over the past year. It's a gift you can accept or decline, for it represents something that has never happened on Earth before.
The young woman was taken aback by these words and honestly didn't know what to say immediately, or even how to address this presence she would later call divine, so attentive was it. A little confused, she thanked the two entities for their presence and what they had just announced to her, without really understanding what it meant. Especially since these few words hadn't been followed by the deposit of any material gift. She also remembers that this didn't seem to surprise either George or the Supreme Being. Neither of them provided her with any additional information at that moment and left as they had come, merging into the invisible before her in the blink of an eye. Amelia therefore went downstairs to join her husband. She felt both surprised and happy, but intrigued and a little doubtful. So she didn't tell anyone about what she had just experienced. It wasn't until she resumed her consultations that she discovered the reality and full scope of it. The second week of the new year had arrived, and with it her first psychic appointment. On Tuesday, January 4th, a young blonde woman from the nearby Grand Duchy of Luxembourg wished to consult her. Amelia recalls that she welcomed her and proceeded as usual. The woman was on the verge of tears and wished to connect with her only son. He was, she said, an adorable little boy who died suddenly at the age of 10, while crossing a pedestrian crossing with his father, where a drunk driver high on fentanyl had mowed them down. The father escaped with bruises and a few broken bones. But the child died, a little less than 4 months earlier, while being taken to the hospital. The perpetrator of the accident had fled, then been found and apprehended by law enforcement. The lives of the little boy's parents had just been plunged into the hell of road traffic accidents. Amelia instantly felt the weight of her mother's grief and the magnitude of the hopes she now placed in this consultation. She therefore sent out a mental call to George, her guide. In the invisible, he joined the two women without delay.
It was then that happened the unexpected, the unthinkable for those present.
1 meter from the seat on which the consultant had sat, a first halo of light formed, very white in the center and vaporous on the edges. The whole thing had an ovoid shape, about 1.40 m high and 50 centimeters in diameter. It was resting on the ground. Although the surprise was total, the phenomenon was curiously not at all frightening, neither for Amelia, nor for her visitor. Then, in a few seconds, the shape became clearer. It clearly took on the appearance of Yohann, the consultant's young child. She began to cry. He was wearing the clothes he had died in and was perfectly recognizable to the mother. He seemed so happy now and smiled kindly at the two women. Amelia's guide intervened briefly to advise against touching the apparition. This the medium quickly conveyed to the mother. She complied, having begun to open her arms as she had done so many times before to welcome her beloved child. A dialogue began. The mother saw her Johann's lips move to speak to her, but heard no sound coming from the child's mouth. Then Amelia, who had caught everything, translated it for her between two sobs. Sobs that she herself could not stop, as her own emotion had also overwhelmed her at that precise moment. Because this, an apparition of this kind, such an incredible vision, had never happened to her, never happened like this before. For his part, the young child confirmed with a thumbs up and laughter that this was exactly what he had just said to his mother, he who was so happy to see her again. For a few more minutes, the mother and her child were able to exchange words via the medium that anyone can easily imagine. Then came the moment when the mother could hold it no longer. She stood up to hug her little one. But this had the effect of making the hologram vanish. For Yohann had appeared in the form of an animated hologram, very much alive, in 3 dimensions and in color.
Then George, Amelia's guide, kindly confided that it was over, that she could end the session. The child had just returned to the invisible. Suddenly, the medium realized that the divine gift announced for her birthday had just materialized, and that it had indeed never happened on earth in this way, in the medium's memory. The mother fell into Amelia's arms. Both were in tears. Tears that now mingled amazement, joy, and so much gratitude for Yohann, for Georges, and for the Supreme Being. For a few minutes, both reassured themselves about what they had just experienced. It was so new, so inconceivable, and so out of the ordinary. So it was a mother in a state of wonder who returned to Luxembourg that day. She had been able to see her beloved little one again for a few moments, almost in the flesh, as she later revealed to her husband.
But what awaited Amelia did not end there. Once the consultant had left, the Supreme Being reappeared at the medium's side and asked her, with the infinite gentleness that had characterized him on December 31st, if she wished for this phenomenon to occur again in the future. The young woman did not immediately find the words to express her gratitude for what had just happened, but she approved of what followed very clearly without hesitation. She felt the unconditional love emanating for her from this exceptional being, for whom this was now the second apparition. It still seemed so unreal and so totally immeasurable. Uncle George, who was now witnessing the scene, applauded Amelia's approval. This had the effect of reassuring his niece about the identity of the other presence and the reality of the miracle that had just taken place. Then the two entities disappeared in an instant from the medium's sight.
The next day, Amelia Sonnenstrahl's phone kept ringing. Everyone wanted to consult her, without delay, if possible. Mid-morning, a neighbor even came to alert the medium to a strange and new development in the neighborhood. About 20 people, mostly Belgian and Luxembourgish, were quietly beginning to queue up outside her house to obtain a private consultation. Amelia had made a world first in private mediumship possible. The Beyond had given her a priceless birthday gift this year, and word was clearly starting to spread.
This story was brought to you by Jean-Luc Januszewski, who created and directed it for entertainment purposes. The beings, places, and situations in this story being purely fictitious, any resemblance to people, places, or situations existing or having existed can only be coincidental.